Sean.
What time does the 7 o'clock meeting start?
7 o'clock! Oh, that's much better. 7 o'clock. Thank you, Sean. Welcome to Position of Neutrality. Welcome to New Freedom. We open every session of Position of Neutrality with a prayer, and Chaplain Lee's in the house.
Come on and stand to your feet all over the room. Father, we thank you on today. We give you all the praise, glory, and honor for allowing us to assemble together. We ask you, Lord, to enter into this place. Use your manservant to speak with clarity. Pour out your spirit throughout this room. Let each and every one in here feel your presence. We know the power that's down on the inside of us. We ask you to rise it up. We ask you, Lord, just to have your way. We thank you. We praise you. We give you all the glory for another blessed night here at New Freedom. In the mighty name of Jesus, let everyone say, amen.
Thank you, Chaplain Lee. Anyone in here for the first time tonight? Good deal. Two of you. So first of all, welcome. Second, let us warn you in advance, you're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. And the primary reason that's liable to happen is that we intend for you to have a different experience here. Tonight we're going to take a look at steps 10 and 11. Each week we take a look at the instructions for a step or so, and then I'll try and show you how I find my experience in it. So that's what we're going to do with 10 and 11 tonight. 10 and 11 speak to us of continuing to take personal inventory, and when we're wrong, promptly admitted it, and then sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we... Okay, I won't go any further than that. You got the point. We got this power down on the inside of us. Now the goal is to increase our awareness of being aware of that power in and on us, yes? So I got to share a little story because it just happened, and it's a powerful enough testimony about walking consciously in the world. Had to go up to Cottonwood this past week to go see my father, who no longer is aware. He's in a nursing home. He's 93 years old. He turned 93 on Sunday. And anyway, it's always an interesting trip, but we're heading up there. We had to pull over suddenly. Denise had an emergency, and she had come up with the emergency after the last possible stop. So I'm annoyed, because now I'm having to exit and go back 2 miles to a rest area. And anyway, I get to the rest area. She runs in to take care of the emergency. And I'm sitting there looking in the parking lot, and I see this truck and trailer, and the trailer is just horrific. Like, I'm so convinced that I need to take a picture of it for a joke, you know, to send to people and say, hey, look, this is New Freedom Executive Housing. It's rough. Has a big just married sign on the back, you know. There's like anyway, you get the picture. And so I'm sitting there thinking of who I can send this joke to, and the cat walks up to me crying, telling me the story about how he and his wife are stranded and they have nothing. And I just handed him the contents of my wallet, because what else are you going to do when you're humbled that way? And I got a word directly from the Holy Spirit for me, but I'll share it with you. Next time I get your attention, don't judge. How many of you felt the signature on that? Okay. Yeah, well, we talked to people in the Spirit, recognize the signature of the Spirit. So that's what we're going to try and improve in conscious contact, conscious awareness of. So we're in the book, page 83. I'm going to read what a lot of people identify as the promises. They're actually the 9th step promises, and not because we're dogmatic here, but they're talking about levels of awareness, how to know where you are in your awareness, in your awakened state to the Spirit within you. Does that make sense? So it says, if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. So when they talk about knowing a new freedom, what are they talking about?
Freedom from bondage yourself.
Yeah, I think you're right, James. I think they finally, because a lot of them, that little third step prayer, relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do thy will. And so when we start getting liberated from our thoughts and our emotions and start feeling empowered as the experiencer of thought and emotion, right, as opposed to being that thought or emotion, all of a sudden there's a liberation there. And that's new to most of us, yes? And a new happiness, because my happiness is no longer dependent on my circumstance. Does that make sense? All right. And then it says that we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. Why not? Yeah, I'm now learning that my addiction was a calling, not a curse, and so the worst of those experiences are now useful to alleviate suffering for others, yes? Okay. So we will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. Check the words they use, comprehend and know. Serenity is a state of being, so one does not comprehend a state of being, they simply recognize it, right? And then to know peace is what? I've had people correct me. I used to say it was, sort of an absence of conflict in the thought life, but really what I've been corrected by pastors that I respect is it's not an absence of conflict, it's peace in spite of the conflict. Does that make sense? So it says no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. We've already discussed why that might be the case. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. A lot of us don't like to own that, but how many of you in your addiction and even post your addiction, just because you didn't perform quite the way you thought you could, maybe you weren't in the right position at work, maybe, I don't know, how many of you have got to a place where you just were full of self-pity? Why me? Why them? How many of you have found that not nearly as useful as it seemed at the time? So the more we focus on serving, seems like that power and purpose within us keeps us from getting trapped in those limiting thoughts, yes? All right, so we'll lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Why? For the very reason I told you that story to open. Because I've walked by a lot of suffering that I could have participated in alleviation of, uncaring or judging wrongly. And now I'm finding power and purpose everywhere I go if I'll seek to improve all the time. Does that make sense? So it says self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Why does that happen? How many of you have learned that the world really doesn't cause how you think and feel? That it's reflecting back to you how you're thinking and feeling. So your circumstance don't define your attitudes. How many of you have to admit that wasn't always so? I could be in some good circumstances and have a bad attitude. And I could be in some really bad circumstances and have an uncaring attitude. Yes? And I'm learning now that my attitude is not dependent when there's an opportunity to serve in every trial. Even if I only serve as something for someone else to observe. Yes? It says, fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. How many of you have discovered that? You know how I recognize it with the new guys, the guys that come in here, the men and women come in here, is you first come in here and you're a little bit jumpy about how outward we all are around here. And then pretty soon you start participating in it. And you start participating in your groups, and you know, all of a sudden you're speaking in front of groups. So your fear of people is going away. How many of you learned to outgrow your fear of economic insecurity? Well, I'll tell you a little secret that we don't always tell people, and we owe it to you. You outgrow financial insecurity by living through some. And you realize that there's certain things you just got to take personal responsibility for, and then you just weather whatever you got to weather. But just because you stop doing bad things doesn't mean bad things won't stop coming to you. So we need you free in spite of the things. Does it make sense? All right, so it says we'll intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. How many of you have started to figure some of that out? Some of the things that baffled us are funny to other people, but they're not funny to us. We'll suddenly realize that God is. Oh, that was weak, guys. You got to. Let's try again. We'll suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Remember, they're coming to believe. So at this stage of their development, they're telling you of their state of coming to. Does it make sense? All right. And then it says, are these extravagant promises? Why not? Why do we think not? Because someone told us to think not? Because I look at those promises from the wretch I was and think, wow, that's pretty damn extravagant. I mean, what you selling? Come on. None of you embellished a bit in order to... I'm sitting in a room full of people who embellish, yes? So the point the authors are trying to make, I'm quite sure the point they make to me is, you're damn right they're extravagant, because I serve an extravagant power. And I'm telling you, he sent me to you. So if you would like these things to happen to you and more, follow me. Yeah? All right. So we think not. They're being fulfilled among us sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly, but they will always materialize if we work for them. That's what you want to hold on to. You may have to go through some stuff. But the promise is for you when you're going through the stuff. When everything's ducky, you won't be looking for a promise. Understand you're going to go through some stuff. I love seeing you guys here. Good to see you, Tom. Thanks for bringing them over. They're here from Edmonton, Canada. These guys they welcomed us a couple weeks. So this thought brings us to step 10. So what thought brings us to step 10? Those promises, that state of being, that freedom, that happiness will always materialize if. And what's the work? We're going to continue now in that rest of the step process, right? Now that I've learned the practices, now I'm going to get disciplined in the practices. So it says we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. So if I'm going to continue, when did I start? I learned to practice in 4 to take personal inventory, suggested format, yes? So I'm going to continue to do that. And then it says I'm going to continue to set right any new mistakes as I go along. So when did I learn how to set right mistakes? I made a list in that inventory, and I said the prayer in 7, and I started going out and making approaches in 9, yes? So, and then the one thing I'd like to call to your attention, when do we do it? As we go along. Get more disciplined in not carrying baggage that's not yours. Make sense? We're not doing this because it's rules. We're doing it because where we're going, we don't need an extra load. One of the extra loads I carry is judgment. That's why I told you the story at the beginning. I don't know I'm carrying judgment. I'm just wired to have judgment. I know I don't get taken anywhere by accident. Here I was somewhere on purpose, and I think it's funny. You guys feel me? And when he speaks to me like I spoke to you. I didn't wash. Don't judge. Okay. It's not the embarrassing kind of word. It's a pay attention kind of word. It's the kind of thing that a loving father says to a son. I brought you here for a reason. Yeah? Okay. All right, so this step brings us to step 10, which suggests, we vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. So what we're doing in the step process, not so much our fellowships, the fellowships have got a whole other different purpose for our journey in recovery. This is the program of recovery suggested, right? And they are talking to us now about this way of living, a manner of living. I needed to change my manner of living into a sustainable manner of living that allowed me to live in this world without inebriating myself with synthetic spirits. Yes? Okay. So it says, we have entered the world of the Spirit. Now notice how they did not equivocate. They didn't say, some of us have, some of us believe in something else. That's not what they said. The first 100, their story of the first several thousand, said, we have entered the world of the Spirit. So you might ask yourself, what's it like to have entered the world of the Spirit? Many of us feared that idea or thought it silly. What's it like? Yeah, just exactly what Sean's talking about, what they just described. We don't regret the past, and we should shut the door on it. We comprehend serenity, and we know peace. That's what it's like to walk in the Spirit, yeah? Who's feeling it? Somebody in here's feeling it. That's the power we call God. So we're talking about tangible sensory power. That's why we want to seek to improve consciousness, because I like a buzz all the time. I can't have it all the time, but I can seek to improve it every time I sense it. Yeah? All right, so our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So understanding of what? Effectiveness at what? You're not talking loud enough, Carrie Ann. Edify the group. How many of you grew in understanding of yourself as you started to understand you had definitely been mentally and emotionally ill? And that wasn't you. Even though it was you, it wasn't you. How many of you had an idea of people that was different than the kind of love and compassion you were shown by whoever helped you? So did you grow in understanding of what we're seeking to be as humans by somebody unselfishly reaching out to you? When someone called your attention to that power down on the inside of you and told you that power, that's God. How many of you started to go, oh, no wonder they wrote books? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Once people took it away from me as a theology or a concept and told me, no, this power we're talking about is the subject of your experience, not the object of your belief. It's happening in you. Once they did that, then I was all in for the rest of it. Does that make sense? All right. So then it says, what did I do now? There we go. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. So here again, Sean and I have been doing this for 15 years or more. If I'm going to continue, when did I start? Sean contends the fourth step, and I always contend, nope. Long before I ever heard of AA or any of their principles, I could spot selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear in you just fine. So what they're saying is continue being human, Joe, but add some more disciplines to it. Does that make sense? It says when these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. So, when are we going to ask? So I'm asking tangible sensory power to remove those thoughts. Yes? Then they're telling me what I'm going to do to participate in the plan. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. It's so important we realize the authors have come from the premise that I've admitted powerlessness, so the one person I cannot help is me. I am uniquely qualified to help all of you, because although I don't see my own difficulties, I can clearly see yours. So I'm going to have to participate in this conversation, and when I do, I'll have revelations like I did on Tuesday. Does that make sense? Because I was in conversation. I wasn't calling a sponsor. I was in conversation with that power down on the inside. Make sense? That's what this manner of living is going to require. It's got to make sense. You cannot move into a conscious relationship without moving into it consciously, which means you examined it with your logical senses and go, yep, I believe so. I'm willing to believe, yes? Okay. So then it says love and tolerance of others is our code. Did you know we had a code? Love what? Tolerate what?
Love everybody and tolerate fucked up behavior.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have phrased it exactly that way, but love the people, tolerate the symptoms of their malady. And the symptoms of their malady are selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear responses, yeah? All right. So, then some more promises. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. That's a pretty powerful promise. How many of you remember, Wayne and I just had this conversation right before here about various stages where people's addictive disorder gets arrested. And some people tell us that they just don't pick up no matter what. And I know it looks a lot like that, but for me that wasn't true. And I don't want to just make light of it in case some of you have never analyzed it, but what happened to me is that ability to put it down even for a little while got shorter and shorter and shorter. And then it was impossible. I would get so violently sick that I would just go swap drug dealers or whatever. And it was never going to end. And they'd say, you're dying. And I'd say, I know, tell me when. And that was it. There was nothing. That was it. And I know we chuckle about it now, but it's really not funny when we see people in it. And that's the guy who got introduced to the power who took me through the process. Does that make sense? So for me, to not fight anything or anyone is absolutely miraculous, even for an instant. For by this time, sanity will have returned. So what you might ask, so you understand what they're talking about, they've defined loosely in a couple different stories what they believed insanity to be from the alcoholic perspective. It's not what people say in the rooms necessarily. They quote whatever they quote, but they talk about an appalling lack of perspective, of the inability to think clearly. Why is that important? Because if somebody says doing the same thing expecting a different result, and I'm an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, I do the same thing expecting no different result. This is going to suck, watch. Don't tell me what's going to happen. I'll bet I can break your record. And I know by your laughter, you know what I'm talking about. And we actually take pride in how screwy it is. Wayne actually told a CO4 one time, if you just leave me alone to do my drugs, I won't cause you no trouble. And he was absolutely serious. The CO4 was less serious about it, or took it less serious. Will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. Think about the promise of that, guys. If you're not there, you need to get with someone who can help you get there, because just not picking up is absolutely the floor. No one says, the floor's the limit, and expects to inspire. Seldom interested, and if tempted, recoil is from a hot flame. A normal reaction to me taking poison, which I had no such reaction. Anyone know what I'm talking about? All right, so we react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. How many of you reacted sometimes interestingly, but seldom would people observing have described it as sanely and normally? Some of us had amazing calm and great calamity, yes, just because of the situations we lived through. But we would terribly overreact to reasonably small bumps in the road. The old timers I met when I first got here talked about pole vaulting over mouse turds.
Yes. I do that automatically.
So the point is we want to not do that because, again, when I get your attention, don't judge. We'll see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. Why does that happen? How many of you have a new attitude toward liquor or drugs? Yeah, I can't even really explain it. I'm not mad at liquor and drugs. It is what it is. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. How many of you had to lock yourself away and you were crazy, and then all of a sudden that was removed from you? We feel as though we'd been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. So, position of neutrality, no matter where we go, people ask us where we got the name. That's where we got it from. We feel as though, in other words, we feel safe. And it's because of a profound experience I had long ago. Went through my step process really quick, and the guy looked at me as he was helping me get ready to get an 8-step list ready. He says, "How do you feel?" And I said, "I don't feel safe." And he said something profound to me. He says, "If you don't feel safe, you're not safe. What are you ready to do now?" So I got busy. Does that make sense? So I always like to share that story. I know a lot of you, it resonated because I can feel it resonating in here. I want people to understand that there's a reason we keep moving, and it has nothing to do with this intellect. This intellect's still catching up to all the things that have been done for me. Okay, so we've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. So what's the problem? Yeah, I have some flawed thinking as a result of my fleshly body, without trying to prejudice anyone what I'm talking about, but I'm driven by fear. Even when I don't identify it as fear, I'm driven by fear. And then I'll mask it with rage or with bravado or with whatever, but the author said they were driven by 100 forms of fear. And then they described all the moods I'd go through in a 10-minute cycle in my life. And so I knew that they probably, at least partially, were talking about a fear problem that has been, if not removed, certainly relieved. Yes? And I think if you look at the third step promises, we lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. It gets removed. We got to stay in the game, and we got to move situationally in what's right there. Okay. So it does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. So they're not talking to you about theories of how anyone ought to behave. This isn't religious dogma. It's just, look, we were once this and now we're that, and the difference is the power we found down in us. Does it make sense? Okay, so that is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. So the one thing you might want to know if you're really serious about this thing, getting free and staying free, how do we know if we're in fit spiritual condition? Just go back and ask yourself those questions. Am I fighting anything or anyone? And if I am, I'm not. Something matter with my spiritual condition. Check in with somebody, or check in with Creator. Having a tough time in creation, check in with Creator. And if that don't work, talk to a trusted friend. Does that make sense? All right. So it's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. What do they mean? Yeah, any number of things. Maybe I don't stay in the manner of living. Maybe I stop serving. Maybe I stop fellowshipping in any way. I mean, you may not stay in the same fellowship you came into, but you better find a fellowship of purpose to, because we do. We'll isolate away, and then we're back to that small world we came from. Yeah? All right, so we're headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. How many of you had some dormant spirits in you? How many of them got out at some point? How many of you discovered they waste no time in destroying the life we've built? So we're not cured of alcoholism, not cured of addictive disorder. We never tried to cure that. We tried to cure a human condition. We tried to restore your identity. We wanted you to walk in who you are and whose you are. And when you know that, then the rest of it's all just a visit. So what we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. So what is a reprieve?
I'm not going to kill you today.
Yeah. A stay of execution, right? All right. How many of you know what you're talking? We can chuckle, but if anyone did to you what you did to you, you'd kill them. I mean, if we get honest, that's in us, yeah? So it says that every day is a day we must carry the vision of God's will into all of our activities. So they're telling us some instruction there. We got to carry this vision into which activities? Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all of our affairs. Which ones? So they're getting us ready. Just because I thought that chemicals were my problem, nope, they were a symptom of an underlying problem. Does that make sense? All right. So they tell you how they did it, so you'll have an idea, understand that they were writing out of a King James Bible. If you do not talk in King James language, it's not necessary that you say this that way. You should be talking meaningfully to the power within you, because that power within you knows how you talk. How can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. So awakening to the moment, figuring out what the purpose is, asking the one who knows. And notice the not mine's in parentheses. That will go away when you're awakened, because there's really not a will apart from God's. There's God's will and my opposition to it. So what we're trying to do is get my opposition out of the way so I can walk in what it is I'm being delivered through. Does that make sense? All right, so these are thoughts which must go with us constantly. When? Yeah, because my thinker is perceiving different things all the time, and it may be slumbering as far as my awareness, but it's never slumbering. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever been disturbed by something that happened because you were unaware of your surroundings, perhaps? Or you ever thought you were in a really good space and then somebody walked in and convinced you you weren't? Never had that happen? Come on. Somebody you didn't know came in. Maybe they had face tattoos, and you knew people with face tattoos. I don't know what those suckers are like. All of a sudden, I'm not where I was. Anybody? Now, around here, people say, you know him, he's the guy with the face tattoos. Oh, well, you just described 300 men. What? All right. So much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. All knowledge, all power. That leaves me with how much? So it'd be a good idea to ask. As one little book suggests, maybe we ask and seek and knock. Yeah? And then the promise is ask and the answer will be given, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open. How many of you have walked this manner of living out and found that's absolutely true, regardless of how you identify theologically? That's what we want you to see. So if we have carefully followed directions, we've begun to sense the flow of his Spirit into us. So now how they're talking to you about a sensory overtaking of your mind and body. So that as you improve consciousness, you'll realize that all the experiences you're having are happening for the benefit of that Spirit within you, right? You can see things, you'll have thoughts, you'll have emotions, but you're not the thought or the emotion, you're the experiencer of thought and emotion. Whole different place to be, yes? It's the difference between seeing a car wreck and being in a car wreck. Subtle, but different, yeah? To some extent, look, I have thoughts that are a lot like car wrecks. That's all I'm trying to tell you. Chased out to their logical conclusion, they would end in a minimum of a car wreck. Okay, to some extent, we become God conscious. So they're telling me I'm now becoming aware, and not just aware, I'm aware that I'm aware. The power is activated in me. The power is speaking to me. The power is speaking to you through me. I know it's happening. If you don't believe it, I'm telling you it's happening to you this whole hour, and you're watching it. So then it says, we have begun to develop this vital sixth sense. What do they mean by vital? They told us that we had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Where and how are we going to find this power? They said we're going to have to look inside us, and we're going to have to search fearlessly, and we're going to have to keep doing that. Which, now we're in that. Does it make sense? So then it said we must go further, and that means more action. Step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy in this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. So, one might ask, what's the proper attitude? Because they would not have said that if they hadn't already told us that. That's why they wrote the book the way they did. Yeah, very early on, when they Ebby's talking to Bill, anyway, talks about handing him a set of spiritual tools. And they agreed that we picked it up, and this we did because we honestly wanted to and we were willing to make the effort. So that's all that's ever been required of any of us. And the reason that's required is you can't move into a conscious relationship without moving into it consciously. You can't get tricked into a relationship no matter how many times you hear that nonsense, because it doesn't work. You get what I'm saying? I've got to move into it consciously. So if I'm not getting what I wanted, what am I not doing? It's never about what I'm doing as much as what I'm not doing. Yes? And you're never going to get power to not do. You ever see that? I just want power to not pick up. Well, then don't pick up. It takes no power to not do. The problem's not in my dexterity. The problem's in my thinking. Does it make sense? So it would be easy to be vague about this matter. How many of you have heard people be vague?
All the time.
Okay, so we want to be not vague, because these are, very specific instructions, precise instructions. Yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Notice how they just changed tense in the way they tell the story. They're still living this way if any of them were still living right now. That's the way they changed the tense. You notice that? Everything else was past tense. Now they're telling you this is what we do. So when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? The very things they had me looking for all day as I went along. So the assumption is I had enough grace to have ignored those suggestions earlier in the day, and I got a chance to clean it up so I can get some rest. Does that make sense? Do we owe an apology? How many of you have been stuck in that? What did you do about it? So they've given us some ideas in the instruction. When wrong, promptly admit it. Why? Because it's baggage I don't need to carry. How many of you thought you owed an apology and didn't? And how many of you didn't think you owed an apology and did? How many of you found there wasn't much difference in the experience of it? So the reality is we don't need to worry about whether I owe it. If someone wants it, they can have it. I'm here to make friends, not win arguments. Yeah? And if we're not friends, then we'll part and we'll go do whatever, right? All right, so have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? That's another good question. If I can't get out of the loop, you ever been in the thought emotion loop? Oh, I don't want to think this way, but screw them. Over and over and over. Have you ever found if you talk to somebody else or go help somebody else, somehow the loop unsnares? So you may not go out of the house, but you may just talk to somebody, stick out your hand, get honest. Were we kind and loving toward all? How many of you, when you're in the beginning, yep, kind and loving toward all? Because you didn't have a meltdown or hit anybody or grab them by the throat. But now it's a higher standard, right? Because we're all talking about the thought life. Were you kind and loving with all in your thought life? And the answer is probably no. And now no is not a bad thing, it's an honest thing. Because I'd like to get better. Yes? What could we have done better? How many of you lived a part of your life where you never looked at what you could have done better? Unless it's in relation to what evidence you left behind that eventually they discovered. I always look to you, Maddie. Maddie's hell with evidence. Not allowed to talk about Maddie. Okay, where we think Maddie has trouble disposing of bodies, guys. That's why we kid. Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time, or were we thinking what we could do for others? Of what we could pack into the stream of life? I think they were reminding us from that day to the current day that if you're sinking, see what you can do for someone else. You cannot transmit what you do not have, and you have power down on the inside of you for their benefit. And if you're there distributing it, you're going to be fine. Does it make sense? So, but we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. How many of you have had that problem? You're really hard on yourself to the point that you're not useful to anyone else. So we got to be careful about that. This is not about shaming yourself. You're walking in an identity now. Whatever you went through for a purpose. Do it on purpose. Let's go. Let's go. There must be somebody to see, somebody to help. Someone needs this story. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness. Are you guys mesmerized or asleep? Was it a pasta night? What happened? We ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. So people that get here and they're atheist or agnostic in the beginning and they're coming into their conversion experience, which you will, because they said the first 100% of them, they know they serve a loving Creator, right? Why would I want the forgiveness of the divine? Because forgiveness is divine. Humans say, I forgive, but I don't forget. And the divine says, I remember your sins no more. That's what he says. So what happens is it either gets removed entirely or it gets repurposed. A lot of you went through some gnarly stuff. A lot of you hurt people. And now your life of amends is lifting people up. Perhaps people that have been hurt by people like you. And you got to see the other side, and you got to experience the grace and being the guy that gets to make the amends you never sought to make. Who felt that? Somebody felt that. Okay. So, the reason we want forgiveness is its power. It's divine power. It's an experience, not a concept. Okay, and what corrective measures should be taken? How many of you did harms to big groups of people? You didn't even know who all the people were in the groups. How many of you went to those groups and made an admission? And we talked about that last week. I mean, those are the things we do. But at a minimum, that experience then becomes a demonstration to others about what a more repentant life looks like, yes? I know I did it. You didn't deserve it. Tell me what I can do to make it right. All right, so on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. On awakening. And to Sean's point, let's take it in bite size, right? He said not the next 6 weeks. How many of you get out there? You wake up and you start thinking about where you need to be 6 months from now. and therefore you're already late. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin what? Yeah, you want help in the plan, right? Why begin a day I don't have a plan for? Doesn't mean the plan can't change, but if I get in with the plan maker, the likelihood that I'm going to be overly surprised is less. We ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. So that's a simple enough prayer for anybody. God, please direct my thinking, especially be divorced of selfish, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Most of us can say that without feeling like we're getting overly theological, yes? So then it says, under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. So why would I want to say that if I don't want to say that? Well, because under these conditions, I want to be able to employ my mental faculties without worrying about how I'm thinking. Yes? And if I'm employing my mental faculties, they're working for me, and I'm working for the divine. And I'll tell you what happens if that isn't the case, then I'm working for my mind. The mind's a tool, but if I don't awaken to know the mind is just telling me what's going on around me, that mind will start telling me who I am and who you are. And then I'm in trouble again. Does that make sense? All right, so it says, with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Do you think that a creator of heavens and earth would give you a tool that was not intended for your use? No, it makes no sense. You wouldn't build anything that you didn't intend to be used. Yes? Okay, so it says our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. So the idea is my thought life in a higher plane. All the promises, 9th-step promises, 10th-step promises, 3rd step, they're all talking about levels of consciousness. They're talking about a higher plane of thought life. Does that make sense? So it's not flowery words. They literally are walking in a higher plane in their thought life, which means I perceive the world differently. I perceive situations differently. Yes? And it's necessary in the servant business because we don't get sent out to treat pretty people. We get sent out to lift up the deplorables, yes? Without judgment. Yep. All right. So, in thinking about our day, we may face indecision. Does that ever happen to you? And guys, if you're new to this, it happens to those of us who aren't particularly new to it all the time. That's why it's in the book. You may face indecision. Some days I'm walking in certainty, some days I'm not. Does it make sense? So it says we may not be able to determine which course to take. Now they're talking about what their indecision may be. Yes? And then they tell us what they do. Here, we ask God for inspiration. God, inspire me. See how simple that is? Okay, this isn't feeling quite right. I don't feel safe. God, inspire me. They're talking about how to walk it out, guys. This is really simple stuff. And then it comes to me as an intuitive thought or decision. Right? Ask, seek, knock, walk. It's already coming. How many of you played football or something when you were a kid? You notice how that quarterback threw the ball where you were going to be, not where you were? Well, you hoped if you were going to make the catch, right, you had to get down there where it was going. Yes? And you didn't know he was going to throw it. You just assumed he was going to throw it. You know what happened when you did that? You exercised a little substance called faith. So it's not a foreign thing. You can do that. Okay. So then it says, for an intuitive thought or decision, it said we relax and take it easy. So I need you to pay attention to that because that's the other mistake we make. Here, I'm placing this in your hands. And could you do it exactly this way and hurry? And then I'm not able to receive direction because I'm too busy defining direction. Because it's all going to happen within me. Does that make sense? So I said we don't struggle. We're often surprised how the right answers come after we've tried this for a while. Why am I working to get spiritually fit? Because fitness is a condition. So we're often surprised how the answers just come because I'm getting more fit than I once was. And I'm still amazed at the things this Creator does with me and through me and for me. Every day, like the trip. So, I mean, just the weirdest stuff happens.
So you stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
That's right. That's what my friend Chaplain Lee said. Always be ready to preach, always be ready to pray, always be ready to die. If you're already, you ain't got to get ready. Just get with it. So what used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Important word for you guys newer to the manner of living, it gradually becomes a working part of the mind. You'll start to discipline yourself when you realize that suffering isn't as much fun as you once thought it was. Well, we will sit and saturate in our belief that somebody else is causing our suffering and realize I'm suffering from my thoughts, not their action. And I can sit in it or I can move out of it, but I'm still going to have to get power and direction. And the more we just get better at it, that's all. So being still in experience and having just made conscious contact with God. So now they're defining it differently. We've had contact, but now they're talking about conscious contact. We're awakening, yes, or we're awake at this point. And they're going to tell us the difference. We're in various stages of awakening. It's not probable that we're going to be inspired at all times. So you're not just going to walk around inspired all the time. You're going to walk around thinking, boy, this sucks. Come on, hit me with something, right? Okay? So we might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. How many of you thought you could pull off something without any help and it didn't work the same way as when you were inspired to do something? And we learned that, right? This really is a power. It's greater than me. It's operating through me. And it looks like it's operating through, but it is not operating through me. And therefore, when I try and pull it off with somebody that I want to impress, that's not how it's going to work. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely upon it. So it's just going to come as a flow of inspiration as long as I'm walking consciously with my Maker. Does that make sense? So we usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that we be shown all through the day what our next step is to be, that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. We ask especially for freedom from self-will and are careful to make no requests for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. So sometimes you don't get it. We often are wanting circumstances to change, and we pray for the relief from circumstances. And what we really need is we want to pray for the power to move through the circumstance, because the freedom comes in navigating circumstance. Does that make sense? The obstacles in my path are my path. Avoidance was my problem. So we're careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that, and it doesn't work. You can easily see why. I didn't want to pay fines. I didn't want to lose my driver's license. I didn't want to lose jobs. But had I not had all of those happen, because I was delivered from it, I wouldn't have learned that once you stripped it all away from me, I still had me, and that was enough to walk out.
I didn't want to go to prison.
I bet you're not alone in this room. And I remember talking to you before you did. So it's hard for us to know for sure if you wanted to go or didn't want to go. You know? I mean, as long as we're just chopping it up. If circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we've been discussing. I'm going to jump to the bottom because I got to get done in time. As we go through the day, we pause. when agitated or doubtful. So they've already set the stage what we're going to do. When I need an inspiration, I ask for an inspiration. But I pause and ask. I don't just keep running headlong, yeah? And then it says, we constantly remind ourselves that we are no longer running the show. What do they mean by constantly? No matter how disturbing I think this is, it's intended for my benefit. I'm here for a reason. If I'm not here for me, I'm here for you. One of the two, but neither of us is benefited by me overreacting. Yes? So then it says, thy will be done. Notice how there is no not mine now, because I'm awakened. That means I recognize where it is I got to go. I may not even like where it is I got to go, to James's point. But go I will, because there must be a message I need to carry. Does that make sense? And then it says, we are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions. Weren't those types of things the things that drove me to make some of the bad decisions that put me in the places I apparently benefited from, but it didn't feel terribly beneficial at the time? Yeah? We become much more efficient. You'll know it with your new guys when you're working with the new ones. They couldn't even get to work. Now they're getting up early. They're getting to work, they're coming home, they're going to the meeting, they're staying up late for the meeting, after the meeting, they're engaging, they're taking on commitments, and they're keeping commitments. And you're finding out they're awakening spiritually, even if they're still talking different than you would have them talk, they're awakening. Yes? We do not tire so easily, for we're not burning energies foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. If I don't have to figure out why everything went wrong and realize, why am I thinking anything's wrong? Just a subtle difference. What am I missing? It can't be wrong. Yes? If I'm wrong, then I admit it. If I'm not wrong, then I'm there on purpose for a purpose. What's my purpose? Does it make sense? All right. So it works. It really does. We alcoholics are undisciplined. So we let God discipline us in the simple way we've just outlined. So when we're talking to you about this power down on the inside, that is how he disciplines us. Straighten out your thinker. Walk in a higher plane. Walk in your identity. Yes? All right, this is not all. There's action and more action. Faith without works is dead. Why do they cite that again? Faith demonstrated is a demonstrable act for the benefit of my brother. So now I'm in service when I don't know I'm service. And for me, who's a doubter by nature, continuing in the works proves the power to me through me. So I benefit and they benefit when I walk in faith. But it requires works so that others can see the redemption I'm walking in. Does it make sense? All right, so the next chapter is entirely devoted to step 12. Thank you very much. Thank you, brother.